Okay, just introduce yourself.
My name is Avery Haynes, and I'm a reporter with City News.
Avery, this week we're talking about enterprise journalism. Could you explain what enterprise journalism is?
I started by saying that I was a reporter, and I think there's a real distinction between being a reporter and being a journalist. And I think enterprise encapsulates what it means to be a journalist as opposed to just being a reporter. And so it used to be, not that long ago, especially at all newsrooms, but City has really moved away from this, where there are agenda stories. So there are press conferences that are held, and as a reporter, you go to the press conference, you interview the people who were there, then you come back, you put your story together, and that's reporting. And City News and other sort of progressive newsrooms have really caught on to the fact that it has to be about journalism. You have to be able to find the stories that people are talking about that somebody is not pushing as an agenda. So it means being relentless in trying to find out what people are actually talking about, so you can bring those stories to viewers.
Now, you've had some great examples of enterprise journalism. So we're going to talk about some examples, like let's say when we talk about the pedophile hunter, how did that story come about?
So this is somebody who was completely under the radar in terms of mainstream media. No one had ever heard of him, Justin, the pedophile hunter. He had a massive Facebook following, and we got a phone call into the newsroom from somebody who wanted to nominate Justin for a hero of the city. And so, often in busy newsrooms, those phone calls can come in and not be answered or not being taken seriously. But because we're so tuned in to recognizing that when people call us with a story, it often can turn into a great story. So just that initial conversation with the woman who called in wanting to nominate him, obviously our story wasn't about nominating him as a hero, which is what she thought the story was, but it was actually showing what this guy does. So we managed to get in touch with him through her Facebook page, set up a sting where we followed him as he was in wait for a potential pedophile who thought he was meeting a 12-year-old boy. And it was fantastic, compelling journalism, because we had taken that tiny bit of time to actually speak to somebody who had called in with a story idea.
The other enterprise journalism story you had was the Al Huda School, and this one relied on some other skills that kind of go hand in hand with enterprise journalism. Can you explain how that story came about?
The Al Huda School is in Mississauga, and this story came about at a time when Al Huda was under international there was an international kind of microscope on Al Huda, because they had different schools around the world, some that were believed to be linked to a terrorist act in the United States. And I had forged a relationship with the Al Huda School in Toronto maybe a year beforehand, in being struck again with an enterprise idea of being struck by the fact that there's so many people have been talking about women who wear a niqab, and we had never actually spoken to somebody who wore a niqab about why they chose to wear it, about what the feeling was when they heard people feeling as though these were oppressed women who were being sort of subjugated by their religion. And so I had spent a lot of time at Al Huda talking to women in niqab about their experiences. So when I saw Al Huda in the news in a very negative light, they were far more willing to talk to me about coming in and showing me exactly, sort of revealing the mystery of what happens in Al Huda. They refused all other media interviews, and they did let me spend a day talking to women about their experiences at this very controversial school.
You have a gift of getting people to talk that sometimes wouldn't want to talk. Just explain to some of the students that some of the skills that go along with that, and something that they could apply themselves.
I do have a skill in that, and so when you hear that, you might think that means that I'm tricking people or I'm conning them into doing things. And I always come at it at a point, other than I'll exclude sort of politicians or criminals from this, because I think that you can go after them regardless of whether they want to talk or not. I always go from the perspective of convincing somebody why it would be empowering for them to speak. Not pressuring them in a strong arm kind of a tactic, but really laying out that an interview sounds like a scary thing, but an interview is just a conversation. And it's not about somebody, if I'm interviewing someone about their personal experience, I always tell them, you know all the answers. It's scary because there's a camera there. Pretend the camera's not there. It's you and I having a conversation. Except if it's a live interview, I always tell people, we can start, we can stop. There's not going to be that pressure of getting in the 10-second clip and then it being finished. So I think it's just demystifying the interview experience, and I don't talk about an interview ever. I talk about having a conversation with someone, and there happens to be a camera there. I think that those days of tricking somebody or putting massive pressure tactics on them are finished, that people do recognize the power of the media, getting themselves out first in front of a camera as being a powerful even weapon in their own story. So that's kind of my technique, and it's worked really well for me.
You're also a very good writer. Can you just talk a little bit about some of your writing skills and how students might be able to kind of work up to that level?
I still tell junior reporters who work here that the biggest trick is to think about when you come back with your story, you know what your story is, you've done all your interviews. How would you tell your mom or your friend the story that you're about to put on air, or you're about to write? And the writing should reflect the way that you would tell your mom. So the first thing that comes to your mind about your story should be the lead, because that's the thing that's most compelling. I mean, there's a reverse effect where you can slowly build into a lead, which I also think is a great way of presenting a story. But I think that for very basic writing skills, you write it the way you speak. You don't use official say, because no one says that. So when you're looking at the script that you've written, is this the way you would tell your mom? Is this the way that you would tell a friend of yours this story that you're telling? Because ultimately, that's all we're doing, is we're telling stories.
What advice would you have for students who are watching this video in their career as budding journalists?
I think that the difference between being a journalist and a reporter is really something to always keep in mind, and to always strive to be a journalist. And that the skills of journalists, you can learn the vast majority of them, but the ones that you can't learn are probably the most important, and that is just having a natural curiosity. The number of times we're right at Yonge Dundas Square, the number of times that I've been walking along here and found fantastic stories because my eyes are open and I'm not tweeting as I'm walking or anything like that. I found incredible stories just from being aware of my surroundings. I think the stories that your friends are talking about are stories that are important. The other day I was down here and somebody approached me, a complete stranger, had a unbelievable stutter. It took him 3 minutes to get out the question that he was going to ask me, and he asked me for directions. And then 2 minutes later, another person came up to me, also with a stutter, asking me for directions. And because I asked them, this is the second person who's come up to me, I found this incredible workshop that was going on right next door to us, where 200 stutterers from around the world were coming, and part of their technique was they had to go out and speak to complete strangers. It was a fantastic story that we ended up putting on air. I shot it with my iPhone, which is also all you really need for journalism now. You can do beautiful edits and storytelling with an iPhone, which is also a lot less kind of scary for people to talk into a phone than to a big camera. So I just think it's being curious, being aware, and being interested in people's stories, because everybody has a story.